Philippine popular culture. The short summary about Marxism. Marxism is a difficult and continuous body of work, but it is also more than this. It is a body of revolutionary theory with a purpose of changing the world in various ways. The point is to change it. Marxism insists that all are ultimately political. As the American Marxist cultural critic Frederick Jameson in 1981 puts it, that the political perspective is the absolute horizon of all reading and all interpretation. What makes the Marxist methodology different from other historical approaches to culture is the Marxist conception of history. The classical Marxism. Marx argues that each significant period in history is constructed around a particular mode of production. That is the way in which a society is organized to produce the necessaries of life, food, shelter, etc. As Marx explains, the mode of production of material life condition the social, political, and intellectual life process in general. This claim is based on certain assumptions about the relationship between base and superstructure. It is on this relationship between base and superstructure what the Marxist account of culture is. The base consists of a combination of forces of production and the relations of production. Marx and Engels claim that the ideas of ruling class are in every approach the ruling ideas. The class, which is the ruling materials force in society, is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. A classical Marxist approach to popular culture would above all else insist that to understand and explain a text or practice, it must always be situated in its historical moment of production, analyzed in terms of the historical condition that produced it. It is crucial, as Engels and Marx warn, and as Thomson demonstrates, to keep in play a subtle dialectic between agency and structure. Althusserianism, as Hall in 1978 suggests, Althusser's interventions and their consequent development are enormously formative the field of cultural studies. Althusser's most significant contribution to the field is his different attempts to theorize the concept of ideology. I shall therefore restrict discussion to this aspect of his work. According to Althusser, a social formation consists of three practices: the economic, the political, and the ideological. The relationship between the base and the superstructure is not one of expression, the superstructure being an expression or passive reflection of the base, but rather the superstructure is seen as necessary to the existence of base. The model allows for the relative autonomy of the superstructure. Althusser produced three definitions of ideology, two of which have proved particularly fruitful for the student of popular culture. The first definition, which overlaps in some ways with the second, is the claim that ideology, a system with its own logic and rigor, of representations, images, myth, ideas, or concepts in 1969, is a practice through which men and women live their relations to the real conditions of existence. Therefore, as the economic, the historically specific mode of production transforms certain raw materials into products by determinate means of production involving determinate relations of production, so ideological practice shapes an individual's live relations to social formation. In this way, ideology dispels contradictions in lived experience. It is accomplishes this by offering false but seemingly true resolution to real problems. This is not conscious process. Ideology is profoundly unconscious in its mode of operation. The relationship is both real and imaginary in the sense that ideology is the way we live our relationship to the real condition of existence at the level of representations, myth, concepts, ideas, images, discourses. There are real conditions and there are ways we represent these conditions to ourselves and to others. Ideologies do not just convince oppressed groups that all is well with the world. They also convince ruling groups that exploitation and oppression are really something quite different, acts of universal necessity. Only a scientific discourse can see through ideology to the real condition of existence. Hegemony. Hegemony is for Gramsci a political concept developed to explain, given the exploitative and oppressive nature of capitalism, the absence of socialist revolutions in the Western capitalist democracies. Hegemony involves a specific kind of consensus. A social group seeks to present its own particular interest as the general interest of the society as a whole. In this sense, the concept is used to suggest a society in which, despite oppression and exploitation, there is a high degree of consensus, a large measure of social stability, a society in which subordinate groups and classes appear to actively support and subscribe to values, ideas, objectives, cultural and political meaning which blind them to and incorporate them into the prevailing structures of power. Capitalism's hegemony is the result of profound political, social, cultural, and economic changes that have taken place over a period of at least 300 years. Until as late as the second part of the 19th century, capitalism's position was still uncertain. It is only in the 21st century that the system seems to have won, or at least to be winning, especially with the political and economic collapse of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, the introduction of the open doors policy and market socialism in China. Capitalism is now more or less internationally hegemonic. Although hegemony implies a society with a high degree of consensus, it should not be understood to refer to a society in which all conflict has been removed. What the concept is meant to suggest is a society in which conflict is contained and channeled into ideologically safe harbors. Hegemony is maintained and must be continually maintained. It is an ongoing process by dominant groups and classes negotiating with and making concessions to subordinate groups and classes. The dominant element of this new language is English, but the language itself is not simply English, but emerged was a transformed English with new stresses and new rhythms, with some words dropped and new words introduced from African languages and elsewhere. The new language is the result of a negotiation between dominant and subordinate cultures, a language marked by both resistance and incorporation that is not a language imposed from above nor a language which spontaneously had arisen from below, but a language that is the result of hegemonic struggle between two languages cultures, a dominant language culture and subordinate language cultures involving both resistance and incorporation. Hegemony is never simply power imposed from above. It is always the result of negotiations between dominant and subordinate groups, a process marked by both resistance and incorporation. Hegemony is organized by those whom Gramsci designates organic intellectuals. According to Gramsci, intellectuals are distinguished by their social function, that is to say, all men and women have the capacity for intellectual endeavor, but only certain men and women have in society the function of intellectuals. Using hegemony theory, popular culture is what men and women make from their active consumption of the texts and practices of the culture industries. Youth subcultures are perhaps the most spectacular example of this process. Youth cultural styles may begin by issuing symbolic challenges, but they must end by establishing new set of conventions, by creating new commodities, new industries, or rejuvenating old ones. From this perspective, popular culture is a contradictory mix of competing interests and values, neither middle nor working class, neither racist or non-racist, neither sexist or non-sexist, neither homophobic or non-homophobic, but always a shifting balance between the two. What Gramsci calls a compromise equilibrium. The commercially provided culture of the culture industries is redefined, reshaped, and redirected in strategic acts of selective consumption and productive acts of reading and articulation, often in ways not intended or even foreseen by its producers. Post-Marxism and cultural studies. Marxism is no longer as influential in cultural studies as it has been in the past. Marxism, a major point of reference for the whole cultural studies project in the UK, has been undermined not just from the viewpoint of postmodern critics who attack its theological propositions, its meta-narrative status, its essentialism, economism, Eurocentrism, and its place within the whole Enlightenment project, but also, of course, as a result of the events in Eastern Europe with the discrediting of much of the socialist project. There were never a prior moment when cultural studies and Marxism presented a perfect theoretical fit. Post-Marxism can mean at least two things, as Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe in 2001 point out in their deeply influential contribution to post-Marxism, hegemony, and socialist strategy. To be post-Marxist is to leave behind Marxism for something better, whereas to be post-Marxist is to seek to transform Marxism by adding to it recent theoretical developments from especially feminism, postmodernism, post-structuralism, and Lacanian psychoanalysis. The concept of discourse is central to the development of post-Marxism, as Laclau explains. The basic hypothesis of a discursive approach is that the very possibility of perception, thought, and action depends on the structuration of a certain meaningful field which pre-exists and factual immediacy. Discourse, according to Laclau and Mouffe, consists in the totality of linguistic and non-linguistic. In other words, they use the term discourse to emphasize the fact that every social configuration is meaningful. If I kick a spherical object in the street, or if I kick a ball in a football match, the physical fact is the same, but its meaning is different. For the same reason, it is discourse which constitutes the subject and the object position of the social agent, and not, therefore, the social agent which is the origin of discourse. The same system of rules that makes that spherical object into a football make a player. That would be all. Thank you for listening.